The forest behind Lino was a riot of sound. Leaves scraped against bark, birds shrieked in the high branches, and the wind hummed through the thicket. It was a world of constant motion and noise. Lino stood at the very edge of this chaos, his paws planted firmly in the damp soil. Before him lay the silent valley. It was not just quiet, it was a void. The air there did not move. The grass did not sway. It looked like a painting that had been drained of its life. Mimi had vanished into that stillness hours ago. Lino squinted, his eyes sweeping across the flat gray expanse, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. A stray tuft of fur or a footprint. There was nothing. The boundary between the living forest and the dead valley was a sharp, jagged line of shadow. He felt the weight of the silence pressing against his skin. He took one last look at the sunlit trees behind him, then turned his gaze toward the abyss. Lino leaned forward, braced his muscles, and stepped across the threshold. The moment his paw touched the valley floor, the world died. The rustle of the forest behind him vanished as if a heavy curtain had been pulled shut. Lino stood frozen. He stomped his right foot hard against the dry, cracked earth, bracing for the familiar thud of impact. Nothing, not a vibration traveled up his leg, not a single grain of dust shifted. He opened his mouth wide, drawing a sharp breath to shout for Mimi. He pushed air from his lungs, his throat tightening with the effort. But the sound simply ceased to exist before it could leave his lips. He tried again, louder this time, his jaw straining, but the air remained deathly still. He reached up to touch his own throat, feeling the muscles tense and vibrate, yet the silence swallowed the effort whole. A cold, hollow sensation bloomed in his stomach. He turned back toward the forest, but the boundary he had just crossed seemed to have dissolved into the same gray, soundless haze. He was trapped. The isolation was a physical weight pressing against his ears. He paced in a tight circle, his claws scraping the dirt, but even that friction was muted. The panic was a rising tide, threatening to pull him under. Lino stood in the center of the gray expanse, his chest heaving, his eyes darting across the empty horizon. He needed a sound, a signal, anything to prove he still existed. He pressed a paw against his ribs, digging his claws slightly into the fur to find a point of contact. He waited. Beneath the frantic, shallow gasps of his lungs, he felt it, a steady, rhythmic thumping. Thump, 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 thump. It was faint, but it was real. It was the only thing in the entire valley that had a pulse. He closed his eyes, shutting out the oppressive gray, and focused entirely on that singular, internal beat. He breathed in time with it, forcing his ragged gasps to slow down. The rhythm became a tether, a lifeline connecting him to his own body. He realized that as long as he could feel that heartbeat, he was not entirely lost. He opened his eyes. The world remained silent, but the crushing weight of the void had shifted. He began to walk, moving deeper into the stillness. Lino kept his focus on the steady cadence of his heart. He walked with his head down, watching his paws strike the dry, desolate earth. With every third step, a faint flicker caught his eye. He stopped, confused, and looked closer at the dirt. Embedded in the parched ground were small, translucent stones, nearly invisible against the gray soil. He took another step, pressing his weight firmly into the ground. A stone beneath his paw pulsed, emitting a soft, ethereal blue light that rippled outward like a pebble dropped in a pond. He lifted his paw, and the light faded, only to flare again when he placed his weight back down. He tested it again, shifting his balance to trigger the glow. It was a reaction to his presence. He looked ahead and saw a scattered trail of these stones, winding away into the distance. A surge of hope cut through the oppressive stillness. He was not just walking through a void, he was leaving a mark. He stepped forward, and another stone ignited. Each step was a promise, a beacon in the soundless dark. He moved with purpose, the blue light guiding him deeper into the valley. The trail of blue light ended abruptly at the base of a massive, gnarled oak. Its roots twisted into the earth like frozen snakes, creating a hollowed space beneath the trunk. Lino slowed his pace, his heart hammering against his ribs. He rounded the thickest root and stopped. Mimi was there. She was curled into a tight ball, her back pressed hard against the wood. She looked up as Lino appeared, her eyes wide and fixed on his face. Her mouth was open, her jaw working in a frantic, rhythmic motion. She was screaming. He could see the strain in her neck, the way her chest heaved with the effort of a desperate cry. But the air remained deathly still. Lino took a step forward, reaching out a paw to touch her shoulder, but she flinched, her eyes darting around as if searching for a sound that refused to exist. She grabbed his arm, her claws digging into his fur, her lips forming his name over and over. He leaned in, trying to catch even a whisper of breath, but the void swallowed everything. He was staring into the heart of her nightmare, a world where her voice had been stolen, leaving only the raw, physical reality of her fear. Lino pulled his gaze from Mimi and scanned the gnarled oak. The trunk was massive, its bark thick and deeply grooved. Near the base, where the roots met the earth, a jagged, dark crack ran vertically up the wood. It was not just a split in the bark. From deep within the fissure, a faint, golden light pulsed, rhythmic and slow, like the heartbeat of the tree itself. He took a step toward it. The air around the tree felt different. It was heavy, dense, and charged with a static pressure that made the fur on his neck stand on end. He reached out a paw, stopping inches from the opening. The golden glow intensified, casting long, flickering shadows against the roots. He could feel a low-frequency hum vibrating through the soles of his feet, a sensation that bypassed his ears and resonated directly in his chest. Lino looked back at Mimi. She was still trembling, her eyes locked on the fissure as if she understood the danger. He turned his attention back to the golden light, his heart hammering against his ribs. He braced himself and reached out to press his paw firmly against the center of the crack. His paw made contact. The surface of the wood was not solid. It felt like pressing into thick, viscous liquid. The moment his fur touched the golden light, the tree recoiled. A violent shudder ripped through the trunk, throwing Lino backward. He scrambled to regain his footing, his claws digging deep into the soft, silent earth. The ground beneath him began to heave. It was not a steady tremor, but a series of jagged, unpredictable jolts that threatened to toss him into the roots. He lunged forward again, slamming both paws against the fissure to anchor himself. The golden light flared, blinding and intense. The tree groaned, a deep, resonant vibration that traveled up his arms and rattled his teeth. He felt the resistance of the magic. Lino gritted his teeth, his muscles straining as he pushed against the pressure. The earth continued to buckle, tossing dirt and debris into the air. He was no longer just touching a tree. He was locked in a physical tug-of-war with the void itself. The entire valley seemed to hold its breath. The pressure peaked. Lino felt the wood beneath his paws splinter, not with a snap, but with a shudder that vibrated through his very bones. Then, the golden light turned white. It surged outward in a blinding shockwave, throwing him backward into the dirt. A thunderous crack erupted, sounding like a cannon blast fired directly into his skull. The silence shattered. It did not fade. It broke into 1,000 jagged pieces. The valley groaned, a deep, tectonic rumble that shook the ground. Then came the wind. It howled through the branches with a sudden, violent force, stripping leaves from the oak and whipping them into the air. The sound of distant water began to roar, a rushing, liquid thunder that filled the void. Lino scrambled to his knees. He heard the rustle of grass, the creak of timber, and the sharp, rhythmic snap of twigs underfoot. The world was alive, loud, and chaotic. He pressed his paws to his head, not in pain, but in sheer, breathless relief. The valley sang, and he heard the sound of his own breathing. Mimi scrambled up from the roots, her throat working as she tested the air. Lino! The sound was sharp, clear, and impossibly sweet. She lunged forward, closing the distance between them in 2 bounds. They collided, paws gripping fur, the physical contact grounding them. The air around them was no longer a vacuum. It was thick with the rustle of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the rhythmic thrum of the wind. Mimi pulled back, her chest heaving, listening to the cacophony of the forest as if hearing music for the first time. They did not wait for the ground to settle completely. Lino caught her gaze, a silent understanding passing between them, and they turned. They ran. Their paws struck the earth with a frantic, rhythmic beat that joined the symphony of the valley. Behind them, the gnarled oak stood silent, the golden light now extinguished, its fissure sealed shut. They sprinted past the stones. As they crossed the threshold back into the familiar woods, the sounds of the world surged to meet them, a roar of life. They slowed to a trot, finally safe, their breath mingling with the rustling leaves. From that day forward, the story became a legend. They knew that when the world turned mute and the shadows grew long, a single, brave act was all it took to break the deepest silence and bring the music back to the earth.